You're welcome. Yes. Yeah. Oh. Morning. Morning. No. Yeah. That's really good. Normal seat. Yeah. Yeah. I said, Andy is. So I don't know.
Are you running the?
You want to have a place to put your coffee?
And undo everything here.
Yeah. That's mine. That'll be mine. It's Kathy. Yep. It's her kind of a thing more than my kind of a thing, so. Sometimes we'll do things just because it's like, okay, I have nothing to do. Exactly. And then sometimes I'll just say, hey, this is what you're like, now I know why I'm here. But she is very much scholarly and I'm.
I
gotta read that. So
there's different versions of Spanish.
oh, yeah. Well, in our village down there, a lot of the people don't even speak Spanish. They speak their Mayan dialect.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah, I did myself. And then. I'll just sit on the other side.
No.
This one is.
Well, welcome, everybody.
Good morning.
Morning.
So, we have some Bible sitting back there. You don't need a Bible today, but if you want to follow along, you're welcome. My name is Jim Ollhoff, and as Pastor Sarah said, I'm a new member, and offered to do some Bible studies. I'm retired now, but I used to teach theology. Well, actually, I started out my career working in churches. I did that for about 10 years, and then I moved into higher education, taught theology for a number of years, and then I kind of transitioned. I get bored easily, so then I transitioned into psychology. And as Mike pointed out, I used to be a writer too, so I spent about 10 years being a writer. And so so what I'm currently doing now is and I like to write on spirituality in the Bible, as well as mental health. So that's kind of what I do in my free time these days. So and I'm really excited to be with you, and we're going to talk about the Bible today. That's Bible study. And we'll talk about Genesis 1. That's a good place to start. But we're also interested in kind of what you need to know about the Bible to get more comfortable with it. And that's what and so I'll ask you some of those questions, and then we'll turn what you say you need into a Bible study for the next couple of weeks. And we're also interested in the fall and what's going on, what you'd like to see in fall Bible studies and things like that. And so we'll talk about that today and the next couple of weeks too. So let's start with let's start with Genesis. So there's parts of the church, not of this church, but of the Church of the United States, that is seemingly hell-bent on saying the point of Genesis 1 is that God created the world in 6 24-hour days. That's the beginning and the end of that chapter. I think there's a lot more to it than that. I don't happen to believe that God created the world in 6 24-hour days. He certainly could have if he wanted, but I think he chose the processes of evolution. So we kind of have to look at what's going on in the world when they wrote Genesis 1 to understand what they wanted to get across. So let me give you a 60-second history lesson. But in the 6th century, before Jesus was born, the big guy on the block was Babylon. They were the biggest power in the whole area. They conquered everybody. They conquered Assyria. They conquered Egypt. They conquered everybody. They were the big guns. And in the year 605, they conquered Judah. And they said, you're our vassal. And that means it's kind of a protection racket, you pay us money and we won't kill you. It's kind of what that saying. Well, that really grated against the Jews because it was against their religion, it was against their faith, it was against their religion to pay somebody else. So we really don't want to pay you. Babylonians said you better pay, and we really just don't want it. It's against our faith to pay. And so they didn't pay. And so in the year 598, the Babylonians had lost their sense of humor completely. Came through for not being paid, came through, flattened everything in the whole in all of the world. Flattened Jerusalem, flattened the temple, took all the gold and melted it down, took it back to Babylon. The Babylonians had a particular or a unique way to prevent revolts. And that was to take people out of their land and take them back to Babylon. And that's what they did to the Jews. They took thousands, we don't know exactly how many, but thousands of people, anybody they thought might lead a revolt, religious leaders, prophets, priests, merchants, soldiers, they took anybody they thought might lead a revolt, and they took them back to Babylon. And there they had to live. And we call this the Babylonian captivity. Because they weren't slaves, but they couldn't leave, and then Babylon wasn't where they wanted to be. Let me read, if you, Psalm 137 was written during this time. And Psalm 137 goes, by the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and we wept when we remembered Zion. Zion is the temple back in Jerusalem. On the willows there, we hung up our harps. For our captors asked for us songs, and our tormentors asked for mirth, saying, sing us one of the songs of Zion. So in other words, the Babylonians are saying, you guys have great music. I'll play some songs for us. And they said, how can we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, may my right hand wither, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember. So that you might get a sense of the pain they felt being in Babylon. The thing is that Babylon was a really good place to live. They had canals that brought in fresh water. They had giant music festivals. They had, remember the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, one of the ancient wonders of the world. They excelled in math, and they excelled in astronomy and science and medicine. And so it was really a good place to live. There were some cities in Africa and China that rivaled Babylon, but in that part of the world, that was a pretty good place. So, and that was kind of a problem because for the Jews, because they're living there, they were there for about 50 years. They're living there, and the kids are going to Babylonian schools, and the adults are getting Babylonian jobs, and the families are going to Babylonian sporting events and going to Babylonian restaurants, and they're reading Babylonian newspapers. What are the religious leaders afraid of?
You're gonna forget Judas.
Oh, they're gonna forget. They're gonna forget who they are. They're gonna forget Judaism. And that was kind of what the Babylonians wanted, right? And so that was a very real concern, and they were wise to think of it. So the religious leaders that had done things. One of the things they did was start synagogues. Synagogues isn't where they worshipped; it was where you went to learn about the Old Testament and kind of have conversations and things like that. Maybe the most important thing that they did for what we're talking about here is this is where they put together the Old Testament. What we know is the Old Testament. Some of it had already been written. Some of it had been told in oral stories. Some of the stories were written in part on the backs of envelopes, and so they took all that and they put it together for the first time. And there are a couple books of the Bible were written after they got back. from Babylon, but the majority of the Old Testament was written during this time. Or compiled, I should say. And this is when Genesis 1 was written, is while they were sitting in Babylon, fearing that they might lose their identity. Okay. Okay, questions so far? Let me stop there for a second.
What country does Babylon currently?
It's in Iraq. What today is Iraq? And there's nothing but ruins there now. It didn't last.
You had mentioned that, the Jews were worried about losing their religion.
Right.
With that, you said they took part in all these other aspects in Babylon. Was there a religion then that they were concerned about moving over to that Babylonians had?
Thank you for that very fine introduction. That's the next. We need something for you. So yes, they were very worried about that, and that's what we're going to talk about next. Any other questions? That's it. Yeah, good job, guys. Yeah,
Roughly what time period was this?
they went to Babylon in 587, and they lasted there until 538. Then they were able to go home. So 5 years, and that's obviously before Christ.
This might be getting too far ahead, but 538, when the Babylonian exiles came back to Judea, was there conflict between the people who had been in Judea and came back and those who had stayed in Judea the whole time?
There was not so much conflict between the people who came back and the Jews, but there was a lot of conflict between some of the other nations that had moved in or moved close. So if you were a Jew, you were okay, but if you were some of those other people.
Nothing's changed.
Anybody else? Okay, so I'm gonna put up here, this is the Babylonian creation story. And this is what the kids are learning in Babylonian schools during their time. There were two gods, Apsu and Tiamat. And they were married, this is male and female. And they had a lot of little god children. Children's little gods. And these god children, as children do, they made a lot of noise. And they made so much noise that Apsu couldn't get any sleep. And so he decided to kill them all. That escalated really quickly, didn't it? He apparently didn't think, oh, let's just sit them all down and say they should hold it down. No, he said, I'm going to kill them all. Well, one of these gods was named Ea. He was the wise earth god. He found out about Apsu's plan, and Ea killed Apsu. He killed Apsu. Well, Tiamat got a little. She was kind of mad, right? Her husband was killed. So what she did is she gave birth to these horrible monsters, and a whole bunch of these. They had poison for blood. They were going to go kill Ea and anybody who hung out with him. Right. The main god was king of the main monster god. Was king of that. Well, Ea knew he was outgunned. Right. So he created a god called Marduk. He was. And Ea and Marduk went and they killed all the little monsters, the monster gods. over here. And then Ea and Marduk got together and they killed Tiamat. Right? And Tiamat, and then, well, Marduk took the body of Tiamat and cut her in half at the waist and made the top half the sky. And the bottom half of her became the land. Okay, and then Ea and Marduk and all the little other godchildren looked around and said, look at all this blood from all the massacres and all these god body parts lying everywhere. Who's gonna clean up this mess? And they said, oh, let's create people. And so they created humans to clean up the mess of all the wars. Okay, you with me so far? What? What do the Babylonians believe about their gods? I'm sorry, I heard a couple things.
They weren't immortal.
Okay, yeah, not immortal ones. Good. Okay. Vengeful. Oh, that's good. What else?
A happy family.
Not happy. Not happy.
Right.
What else?
Violence.
Good, violent.
Was any of that paternal necessary?
Sandy,
Was it any of that paternally motivated or,
what do you mean?
well, like for the father's side of it or the male side of it?
Oh, you mean, what was it, misogynistic, like,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, so, I don't know how to spell misogynist.
Why?
Okay. So, yeah, so there was some misogyny or women hating in the whole.
Male privilege.
Ooh, that's a good, better way to.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's say that, let's say male. Good. What did they think about people? What was the role of people?
Clean up the mess.
Clean up the mess, yeah.
Servant.
The servants, that's good. Slaves, yeah. They were kind of the janitorial afterthought, right? So they were the slaves. Okay, if you have the Bible, let's go to Genesis 1.
And I don't have it on mine, sorry, dude.
Somebody want to read the first like five verses?
In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Then God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day.
Somebody want to read the next 5 verses?
And God said, let there be a dome in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters. So God made a dome and separated the waters that were under the dome from the waters that were above the dome. And it was so. God called the dome sky, and it was evening and it was morning the second day.
Okay, and then it goes on in verse 9 with the waters under the sky. Yeah, it was so. And at the end of verse 10, and God saw that it was good. And they created vegetation. The end of verse 12, God saw that it was good. End of verse 18, God saw that it was good. Then he created living creatures in verse 21, end of verse 21. And God saw that it was good. He created all different animals, and in verse 25, the end of verse 25, God saw that it was good. Then he created people. And in end of verse 31, after he created people, he said, God said it was very good. What are the authors of Genesis 1 trying to say about that? Benevolent. Let's write these down. Genesis 1, benevolent. What else?
All powerful.
Good. All powerful.
Don't get the name in there.
People came last.
I'm saying,
People came last.
people came last, why?
This is a question.
That's good.
You can take it two ways, either that it was at the bottom of the list, or it saved the best for last.
I kind of go with the second one. Just me. We usually talk about people being the pinnacle of creation, rather than a janitorial afterthought, like the Babylonians said. People are the pinnacle. What else do they want us to know about God?
Generative.
Generative. What's the generative? That's a good word. Maybe another word that goes along with that is created.
It's sort of interesting, he or she, God has some human qualities in there. Yes, the rest,
That's okay.
or she does.
God was like Pastor Sarah this morning.
Yeah.
And it's more than just like rest.
Designer.
Good.
He can speak these things into existence.
Good.
Landful,
I'm sorry.
landful.
Planful. Good. Full of plans.
God needed overseers for what he has created.
Good.
Caretaker.
So, yeah, caretakers or overseers or stewards, somebody to take care of the creation. Good. What God created was good. Everything was good.
God is a good person.
Very good. Very good, yes.
Either.
Well, and that which is created is also good. Like there's kind of a delighting in, celebrating.
Oh, that's a good word, delighting in. Yeah, it's almost like God is having fun with this, right? Hey, this is why Genesis 1 was written. Right there. Okay, and Lutherans have always, when Lutherans started back in the 1500s, they kind of framed a lot of their theology in this is what we reject and this is what we believe. Okay, that's kind of what Genesis 1 is. We reject all this stuff. Okay, we reject all this stuff. Okay? We reject this view of God is, and we believe all of this stuff. This is what we believe. Questions, comments?
You have to give
Those
the,
people,
Which people?
the ones that got killed in the red area.
That's a good question. The Babylonians were, they wanted to say that a lot of bad things happen in the world, but it's not our fault. It's the gods' fault. And so, because the gods are, you guys identified stuff, the gods are throw temper tantrums and And they kill people that they didn't have to,
Yeah,
and all that,
shouldn't have happened.
yeah. Yeah,
You have to give the dummies a simple explanation of why they're there. They want to know why I'm there, and you gotta simplify it for them. You can't go off on tangents. However, I will refer to another book later about this.
okay, good. Anybody else?
Isn't this, I mean, basically justifying the two cultures? I mean, the Babylonians, they can, through this, they can justify why they took, took another people back to their country. They can justify the top down, their power structure.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good comment. Yes, they can, with this kind of a belief system, they can justify just about anything they want and do anything to anybody. And they did.
One other thing is we're comparing gods to one God.
Ah, good. Yeah. Yeah, you didn't have 10,000 gods. Like we just have one.
So who was writing this stuff,
Who?
or what, or how are they doing that?
You mean
Yeah.
the Genesis one?
Was this when they just all got together?
Yeah, so they're sitting there in their synagogues and we're thinking we gotta come up with a story that's not, so that people don't believe the Babylonian story. So they sat down and wrote it. And we, as Lutherans, we believe, God played a hand in that and got them to write what they did.
I've been told that the story of Genesis somewhat follows didactic legends.
Oh, yeah.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, say that again.
That the story of Genesis follows didactic legends of that time.
Yeah. Yeah, there were, every culture has their own kind of creation story. And so yeah, it was a common way to construct.
It wasn't in my chapter of Genesis, but the guys and girls who researched this for our Bible class said that almost, you think there's only one flood? Every culture at that time period had a great flood. So they had to make it, a reason why, but it was a natural occurrence when the ice caps melted and went whoosh.
Yeah, in fact, the Babylonians had a great flood story, which we can talk about.
Yeah, they said there were 5 or 6 or 7 that were written down about.
Well, and even we have two creation
Right.
narratives, right?
Right.
So oftentimes people think in Genesis, there's the one, which tends to be the Genesis one. But even in our own sacred text, there's two different ways of telling the story.
Right. And we see the Babylonians had this second creation story also, just like we do. In several places of the Bible, not in the Bible, just in the first Genesis and a couple in Exodus, there's about half a dozen stories that are lifted from Babylonian stories. But and the second creation story is one of them. But when they lifted it, and it was common in the ancient world. Like if you remember, the Greeks had their mythology, and the Romans just took it hook, line, and sinker. The Jews never copied and pasted mythology. There was always differences. And so what you can get out of the story is like, what are the differences? And so we see things in the second creation story, the fall from grace, that are different from the Babylonian stories.
So I have a quick question. So Jim, is your thought that like the Jewish community of Babylon kind of had a working concept of God? That they wanted to like that they were telling the creation story with already kind of a working idea that their God was different than.
Yes. Yeah, exactly. Because they still had a big chunk of the Old Testament through stories and all that. So they were pretty comfortable knowing who God was. But they hadn't told it against the backdrop of this here until Babylon.
I was on your, I was under the understanding that Genesis was one of the books of the law. Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah,
and
the
that
first
was-
5 books are considered.
And that was by Moses, right? And Moses would have predated this. So
Yeah.
how does that fit in with that
Um,
framework?
they're called the books, Jesus called them the books of Moses one time. And so some people took from that Moses wrote all the books. I don't think Moses wrote all the books. But those first 5 books are called the books. Because Moses was the same character.
Okay, so that there is a basis for that argument in the Bible that Moses wrote the.
Sure, yeah, that's where, it comes from,
Okay,
Jesus is coming.
You framed at the beginning, looking at this. About people who take a 6-day creation literally, and they have their own agenda. Another phrase, though, that they seem to be keying off of that really jumps out at me in verse 28 is half dominion. And I wonder if we can say a little about what does that really mean when God left them and said, have dominion over all this that I've just placed you in.
Yeah, what do you think of it?
Well, it's not Christian nationalism.
Right. It's not destroying everything.
It's not destroying everything. It's press it gently. It's if if you're given a garden and you trample all over it, you're not gonna have it anymore. So that's kind of what it says to me. You need to take it tenderly.
Yeah, good, nice.
Again, you have to remember that most of the Old Testament was oral tradition. It was passed down and it was like kind of like telephone. It may have changed here and there. But it just popped into my head that the first mention of having anything written down was when Moses received the challenge with the 10 or 15 commandments. And that they then had an Ark of the Covenant where they carried the word of the law of the God. Not made up by man, but as a symbol of his dominance over them.
Okay, we got about 3 minutes left. Yes.
I've been reading about some of the discoveries by the new Webb telescope, and they say that there's like 200 billion galaxies. Now, are these 200 billion galaxies, are they part of the creation story?
Oh, that's
Now you're doing it.
That's a really rotten question to ask. You can come back to it. Yeah, you can come back to that.
Mike tends to do that.
We know this is not a science. It's beautiful poetry and just.
Right. Wasn't meant to be a science book. Good. I thought you asked great questions, and so I really appreciate that. I was thinking we'd have about 15 minutes to talk about what you want to do for the next couple of weeks and into the fall, but okay, now we got 2 minutes. So what do you want to do next week? When you get into the Bible, where is it most fuzzy for you? Is it, timeline? Is it the way the books are laid out? Is it certain books of the Bible that you don't get, or what's
Yeah.
fuzzy for you?
Yes.
With her.
It always bothers me personally, that God in the Old Testament doesn't seem to be the same as God in the New Testament.
That's a plan of his, her too.
Yeah, well, she knows, but I don't.
I got a book for you.
Anyway.
Yeah, and that's
the big question that bothers.
that's a great question. And it bothers a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I think to get at that, we have to understand the kind of history that the Bible is. It's what we call reflective history, not literal
Right.
history. And so but that'd be worth good conversations.
I'm interested in, the Catholics have other books of the Bible.
Yeah,
There are additional, there's the Apocrypha, or, there's the New Testament.
Gospel of Thomas.
Yeah, the Gospel of Thomas and those
Right.
additional. Why these books?
why do we have the books that we have?
Yes.
Yes, that's a great question.
Because the guys who made the choice voted while the other guys were in the bathroom. That's how you make a canon.
That's Pastor John.
That's Pastor John too.
Revelations, I'm confused.
She has. Yeah. Yeah, that'll take more than a couple of weeks, but yeah, that's actually my favorite book. The book of Revelation has more hope in it, and that back to what we've been talking about in church, has more hope in it than any other book of the Bible, I think. But you don't get that from the movies about the book of Revelation. It's all.
Could we,
I'd like to contextualize the Old and the New Testament today. I mean, how you make sense of what was to what is created.
Well, that's a another good thought, yes.
I like learning about the context in which was written down, like like what we talked about today at the very beginning.
Okay.
What was going on in the lives of the Jews when they first started writing it down.
Great. Good.
or go through the sections of the law, the history, the prophets, and the poetry.
Okay.
So you know, a whole like graduate degree.
Nice to meet you. And we'll have free time the next.
It'd be helpful to me if we could keep in mind and track the development of the overarching principles.
I love that.
That's red thread.
I love that, yeah. Because what a lot of fundamentalists, not just Christianity, but in all the religions, they'll pick out one verse and say, well, this is the word of God, but they don't think about the other 3,000 verses that say the opposite. Yes.
Yeah, for example, the subject of the rapture.
Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. It's a great example.
Along that same line, it's very helpful, I think, to have an overview of the portions or the books. Just briefly touching on the purpose of each one or overall what the.
Awesome.
Instead of the details.
Yeah, good. Okay, we have 30 seconds left.
Okay, understanding the metaphors of the gospels.
Like the parables. Yeah. And frankly, we misunderstand them all the time. Especially in America.
Yeah.
We make it about us.
Yeah.
Good.
I'd also like to hear a discussion about the parts of the Bible that are more universal to other religions.
So good.
Like Judaism, like.
Awesome.
Okay, the book I was going to tell you about is written by David Plotz, Plotz. It's called Good Book, the bizarre, hilarious, disturbing, marvelous, and inspiring things when I read every single word of the Bible. This is a guy who had his bar mitzvah, went to an Episcopalian high school, possibly college, and one day when he was at some young kid's bar mitzvah, he was kind of bored. So he picked up the Torah and started reading it. Not just what the rabbi had told him in Talmud Torah or what the priests had told him in the Episcopal Church. He read it as, oh, well, this book was written, read in the guy's Bible study about 10 years ago. It passed around everybody because it's a thought-provoking book, because God, in the beginning, after you get a couple books in, he was vicious, he was mean, he killed people, he tortured people. And then by the time you get to the New Testament, oh, he's a sweetheart, he's a shepherd. It's the evolution of how he is either perceived or how he allowed us to learn about him as he or she met with the times, because he made all these people who had brains and questioned things.
Good. Okay, well, thank you so much for coming.
I'll take
How are you?
You know Alan Mock?
Yeah.
He's done it. Whenever you can just get together, figure out what it's gonna be, or you can. That brings me. Yeah. Yes. A lot of different big roles. That. Yes. I never forgot this.
And then.
You definitely have a. So, yeah, that's very encouraging. Come on. Here's the other. We'll have one conversation.
Yes.
John Matthews.
He was a big one.
Big one was a good. Yeah, he was like president of the United States. That meant that he was also against. Everybody, the whole constitution. Oh, but there is a whole lot of.